The desert sun scorched the earth as Jack knelt in the dirt, his fists clenched, veins bulging. Dust swirled around him, kicked up by the roaring motorcycles of the men who had just made the worst mistake of their lives. They thought stealing a trucker's dog was funny. They thought he'd beg. Instead, Jack slowly rose to his feet. And when he did, hell followed with him. Have you ever had something precious taken from you? How far would you go to get it back? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more intense stories. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the desert road. Dust filled the air, mixing with the rumble of motorcycle engines. The gang had taken what they wanted, their laughter still echoing in Jack's ears. They thought it was just a joke. Jack didn't move. His chest rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths. His knuckles turned white as he clenched his fists at his sides. His truck, his rig, the thing he had spent his life building, was still parked behind him, untouched. But they had taken something far more valuable. His dog, Max. The loyal mutt had been with him for years, riding shotgun through endless miles of open road. Jack didn't have a family. He didn't have a home. But he had Max. And now Max was at the end of a leash, tied to the back of the gang leader's motorcycle. Scarface, the leader, sat on his bike like he was some kind of king, one boot resting casually on the ground, grinning like this was all some bar fight they had already won. "You know, trucker," Scarface called out, tugging at Max's leash, making the dog yelp, "you ought to say thank you. Most people gotta pay for a lesson like this." The other bikers laughed, shifting their rifles, watching Jack, like he was some dumb animal too stupid to know when he'd lost. Jack's fingers twitched, but he stayed still. Not yet. Scarface nudged his bike forward a few inches, dragging Max through the dirt. The dog scrambled, whimpering, his paws kicking up dust. Jack's jaw clenched so tight it felt like his teeth would snap. Scarface noticed, and he loved it. "Oh, what's wrong, big guy?" he sneered, gripping the leash tighter. "You upset? This little mutt mean something to you?" Jack exhaled slowly. He wasn't angry. No, he was past that. What he felt now was something much worse. Scarface leaned forward, lowering his voice, like he was sharing some grand secret. "Say the word, and maybe I'll let him go. Maybe I'll be real generous." Jack finally looked up, his eyes dark, steady. "No, you won't," he said, his voice cold as steel. Scarface's smirk flickered for a second. Jack took one step forward, just one, and suddenly, the gang stopped laughing. The desert air felt heavier now. The laughter from the gang had stopped. Jack had taken just one step forward, but it was enough. Scarface's smirk twitched, his fingers tightening around Max's leash. The other bikers shifted, their hands hovering closer to their weapons. Jack could hear the wind, the distant hum of the engine cooling in his truck, and Max's panting shallow, nervous. "You really don't get it, do you, trucker?" Scarface muttered, tugging Max forward, making the dog stumble. "You lost. You don't make demands." Jack didn't answer, didn't blink. Scarface let out an exaggerated sigh, like this was all so boring. Then he nodded to one of his men. "Show him." Jack barely had time to react before one of the bikers stepped up fast. A fist came swinging toward his face. Jack moved, not back, forward. The punch barely grazed his cheek as he ducked, grabbed the biker's wrist, and twisted. Hard. Crack. The man screamed, his arm snapping in the wrong direction. The rest of the gang reacted instantly. 2 rifles came up. Boots scuffed against gravel. Hands flew to pistols. Jack released the broken-armed biker, who crumpled to the ground, howling. He didn't even look at him. His eyes were on Scarface now. Scarface had stopped smirking. "That," Jack said, his voice cold and steady, "was your warning." Scarface's lips curled, fury creeping into his face. "You son of a—" In a blur, he yanked out a knife and bent down toward Max. Jack lunged. Before Scarface could react, Jack's fist met his jaw with the force of a sledgehammer. The knife went flying. Scarface hit the ground hard, choking on dust as he skidded backward. The gang froze. Max barked wildly, his leash still dragging in the dirt. Jack rolled his shoulders. No fear, no hesitation. "You had your fun," he said, stepping over Scarface's fallen form. Scarface coughed, spitting blood. Jack kept moving, and this time, The gang was the one stepping back. Scarface scrambled backward, spitting blood onto the dirt. His gang, the same men who had been laughing minutes ago, stood frozen. Jack rolled his shoulders, taking slow, deliberate steps toward Scarface. No hesitation, no fear. "You made 2 mistakes," Jack said, his voice low, steady, dangerous. Scarface's fingers dug into the dirt as he tried to push himself up. He was shaking now. Jack didn't let him. He grabbed Scarface by the collar and hauled him to his feet in one brutal motion. The gang leader gasped, eyes wide. "First mistake," Jack growled. "You thought I was just some trucker." Jack turned slight just enough to glance at Max. The dog's ears were pinned back, panting, scared. "Second mistake," Jack's grip tightened, his knuckles turning white. Scarface's hands flew to Jack's wrist, desperate to break free, but Jack didn't budge. "You took something from me." Then, with one devastating punch, Jack drove his fist into Scarface's gut. The gang leader collapsed with a choked gasp, kneeling in the dirt. Jack let him go. He watched as Scarface clutched his stomach, struggling for air. The bikers stared in stunned silence. "You boys still think this is funny?" Jack asked, his voice cold as steel. The gang didn't answer. Jack reached down, untied Max's leash from Scarface's bike, and gave it a firm tug. Max trotted toward him without hesitation. Jack knelt, running a hand down Max's back. "You okay, boy?" Max whimpered, then licked Jack's hand. Jack exhaled. Then he stood up, and when he turned back to Scarface's gang, there was no doubt left in their minds. They had just messed with the wrong man. Scarface was on his knees, choking on dust, his face twisted in agony. His gangons confident, once laughing, stood motionless. Jack let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. He wasn't tired. He wasn't even winded. He just wasn't done. "Pick him up," Jack ordered. The gang hesitated. Jack's eyes darkened. "I said pick him up." 2 of the bikers, shaking, reached down and grabbed Scarface under the arms, hauling him upright. He swayed, barely able to stand. Jack stepped closer. So close, Scarface could feel his breath. "You thought I was just some trucker," Jack muttered, his voice a quiet growl. "Thought you could take from me and walk away." Scarface couldn't even answer. Jack reached down, yanked Scarface's knife from the dirt, and held it up. The sun glinted off the blade. For a moment, just a moment, the gang thought Jack was going to finish him. Instead, Jack turned and walked away. He strode towards Scarface's bike, where Max's leash had been tied just moments ago. The dog stayed close to his side, eyes locked onto the gang. Jack didn't stop at his truck. Instead, he grabbed the keys off Scarface's bike. Scarface blinked, trying to understand what was happening. Jack turned back to face the gang. "Take off your cuts." The gang hesitated. Jack's voice dropped into something deadly. "Now!" One by one, the bikers shed their leather cuts, the symbols of their brotherhood. The patches their identity fell into the dirt. Jack knelt down, scooped them up, and walked back towards Scarface. He let them fall at his feet. Scarface looked at them, then up at Jack. "You're done," Jack said simply. "Your boys? They don't follow you anymore." Scarface looked to his gang, but none of them met his eyes. "You see," Jack continued, voice steady, "you don't lead men with fear, you lead with respect. And you lost that today." Scarface looked broken. Jack gave him one last glance. Then, without another word, he climbed into his truck. Max jumped up into the passenger seat, tail wagging, like he knew justice had been served. Jack turned the key, the engine roaring to life. As the dust kicked up, Scarface sat there, staring at the leather cuts in the dirt. His gang had left him. His power was gone. And worst of all, he knew he'd never get it back. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the open desert. The sun was setting now, casting the sky in deep orange and crimson, as if the world itself was winding down after the chaos of the day. Jack drove in silence. Max lay curled up in the passenger seat, his head resting on Jack's knee, his tail twitching in restless dreams. The dog had been through hell, but he was safe now. That was all that mattered. Jack reached down, scratching behind Max's ear. The dog stirred, let out a deep sigh, and nuzzled into Jack's leg. "Yeah, I know, buddy," Jack murmured. "It's over." But was it? Jack stared out at the endless horizon. He had walked away from Scarface and his gang, But he knew the truth. There would always be another fight, another man thinking he could take what wasn't his. That was the way of the world. But this time, they had picked the wrong man. He exhaled, tightening his grip on the wheel. "You see, Max," he said, more to himself than to the dog, "there's a lot of bad people out there. People who think they can push others around, take what they want, leave destruction in their wake." Max's ears perked up, as if listening. "But they forget something," Jack continued, his voice steady. "There's always someone willing to stand up." The truck rumbled forward, the hum of the engine filling the quiet. Jack had seen a lot in his life. He had lost friends, lost family, and for a long time he had told himself he was done fighting. But today proved something he had been running from for years. He wasn't done. He never would be. Jack glanced over at Max, at the way the dog trusted him completely, even after everything he'd been through. "Some things are worth fighting for," Jack muttered. "And some men just ain't built to back down." Max wagged his tail. Jack smirked. Maybe that was all the answer he needed. A question for you. Have you ever had to stand up for something, Vin, when the odds were against you? Would you do it again? Tell us your story in the comments. And if you believe that justice isn't about who's the strongest but who refuses to back down, then hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because in a world full of bullies, it's the ones who stand their ground that make all the difference.